Financial Argument. Follow us on YouTube.
Maybe the most important interview you've listened to in the last few years. Our guest today is without a doubt my favorite. His books, you definitely want to own his books, read his books. Best-selling author. This gentleman has advised hedge funds. He's even advised the intelligence community in the United States, including the Pentagon. Our guest today is the author of the new book, The Road to Ruin, the Global Elite's Secret Plan for the Next Financial Crisis. Recently best-selling author of The New Case for Gold, The Death of Money, Currency Wars. Our guest today is none other than Jim Rickards. Jim, thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you. Thanks.
Jim, I want to start off with what's on everybody's mind. They're going to listen to this interview before we know the results, and that is the election. When it comes to the global elite's secret plan for the next financial crisis, who is their pick? Because a lot of people think that it's Clinton, but in a way, Trump might work out perfectly because he might be the ultimate scapegoat. Who are the elites cheering for the presidential election?
Yeah, I think there's very little doubt that they're cheering for Hillary Clinton. She's one of them, almost a charter member at this point. And, when we talk about the elites, and I discuss this in the book, The Road to Ruin, it's not some secret cabal. I mean, we know who they are. It's Christine Lagarde, it's Mario Draghi, it's Larry Summers. They're central bankers, heads of multilateral institutions, professors. It's a relatively small group, not 10 people, but probably several hundred who collectively run the international monetary system, in addition to G20 heads of state and other senior policymakers and a few others. So we know who they are. I talk about their secret plan. It's really only secret from everyday citizens and everyday Americans. It's not secret from each other. You can dig it out of the IMF website and the Bank for International Settlements and G20 final communiques. You have to be a little bit of a geek like me to read all that stuff and get through the working papers and the technical papers, and you have to understand the jargon they use. But I've been trained in all that, and when you go through it, you can see what they're working on. But the Hillary Clinton would just be more of the same. She would fit right in. Trump is much more unpredictable. He's he sort of presents himself as an elite in the sense he's very wealthy, very prominent, but he's, as far as I can tell, I haven't met him personally, but he doesn't have a huge network. I mean, he's known to everybody in the world because of his successful television shows, but he seems to, mostly hang out with his family and some friends. You don't see him at Davos or Jackson Hole or the Aspen Ideas Festival or these other places where the elites get together and congregate and hang out with each other, IMF meetings and so forth. So he's rich, but he's not one of the elites in the Bilderberg sense. He's not really in that club. They don't know how to predict him. They don't know how to get to him. They don't know how to buy him off, in other words. So I don't really think he is part of that elite and would be much more of a wild card. As far as blaming him, yeah, I mean, you might see a situation where if he wins, I think he will win, by the way, but if you see a Trump administration, they might say, well, let's just, all this, all the market crashes that didn't complete in 2008 and interest rate hikes and deflating asset bubbles, let's do all that and put it on his watch and make him very unpopular. That remains to be seen, but Hillary's no doubt the pick of the global elite.
Do you think he's going to win by a close margin, or do you think this could be an avalanche election?
No, I think it'll be an extremely close election. And, I expect Trump to win, but, I don't want to put a hard stake in the ground on that. I mean, it's going to be a close election. It could go either way. Hillary could win. I think Trump will win, but I think it'll be close, probably be up late next Tuesday night or maybe even into the early morning. There's also some scenarios that are not far-fetched. They're not the most likely outcomes, but it wouldn't be a stretch to see a tie, in which case the presidential election would go to the House of Representatives. the members of the House would have to choose among the three candidates. Of course, they would pick Trump because he's a Republican and the House is controlled by the Republicans. But that would be an interesting turn of events.
Sure. What is Hillary Clinton's agenda with Russia? You've seen it in the debates. We're definitely seeing it escalate now. She keeps trying to almost pick a fight with Putin and Russia.
Well, that's right. And remember that a lot of this goes back to 2014 and the situation in the Ukraine when the British and the U.S. working together tried to depose a pro-Russian prime minister in Ukraine. He was in Kiev in western Ukraine. And Ukraine was sort of a balance. Ukraine's really, you could divide it right down the middle. The eastern half is Orthodox Christian. The western half is Catholic. The eastern half is ethnically more Russian. The western half is ethnically a little more Central European. They're really divided in a number of ways. And what the West tried to do was get rid of the pro-Russian prime minister and start a kind of a people power movement. Well, that worked, but Putin didn't take it lying down. He turned around and invaded Crimea, annexed it. Crimea is really part of Russia now. Obviously used influence and paramilitaries and other military and intelligence assets in eastern Ukraine to support those, in effect, a civil war or push for autonomy by a couple of provinces there. The United States did not want to push back kinetically. We weren't going to drop the 82nd Airborne into Sevastopol, so we retaliated with economic sanctions, and which we think of as economic, but the Russians, I think, correctly consider it an act of war. The Russians have retaliated with cyber financial warfare. And this is escalating. I would say that World War III between Russia and the United States has already begun. Well, Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State for part of that, and certainly supportive of that. And Putin views her as an adversary, and I think that that tension will continue if she becomes president.
Jim, in your book, The Road to Ruin, where are we on that road? I mean, does that road have a few years left for us to prepare, or are we closer to the end?
Well, a few years at most, but I wouldn't wait to prepare. I would be prepared now. In The Road to Ruin, I use three financial crises to illustrate the instability and of the system and the reaction function, and talk about what investors should do to preserve wealth. I look at 1998, 2008, and I go forward to 2018 just to keep that 10-year tempo. That's a hypothetical date, but I think it's a pretty good estimate. But I remind people that the next crisis could come tomorrow, so you need to be prepared now. So let's just take those sequentially. 1998, of course, that was the Russia default and collapse of long-term capital management. The world came just hours away from the complete closure of every stock and bond market in the world. I mean, I know that. I was the lawyer for long-term capital. I negotiated that bailout. I was in the room with the Fed and the Treasury. I know how close we came to not getting the deal done, which would have led directly to massive financial panic. Lehman Brothers would have failed then. I mean, Lehman Brothers was already a weak link as early as 1998. It would have failed then, even though it obviously ultimately did fail 10 years later. That didn't happen because Wall Street got together and bailed out the hedge fund. Then the Fed cut interest rates not once but twice within a 2-week period, once at a regular FOMC meeting, once at an emergency meeting where they did not wait for a scheduled FOMC meeting. They acted on their own, which they're allowed to do. That was October 1998. By the way, that was the last time the Fed took a rate policy action other than a scheduled FOMC meeting, and life went on. Now come forward 10 years to 2008, another financial panic. Again, the world was just days away from the sequential collapse of every bank in the world. We saw, Bear Stearns collapse in March 2008. Fannie and Freddie collapsed in June and July 2008. Then Lehman in September 2008. Morgan Stanley would have been right behind that. Then Goldman, then Citibank, Bank of America, JP Morgan, they all would have collapsed. That didn't happen because, again, the Fed truncated the process. They intervened in a massive way. We all know about the over $3 trillion of money printing that the Fed engaged in between 2008 and 2015. But in addition to that, they did about $10 trillion worth of swaps with the European Central Bank. What was going on there, currency swaps, what was going on there was that liquidity was drying up in the European banks, dollar liquidity, they had dollar assets. They needed to borrow dollars to fund those assets. A lot of those borrowings came from U.S. money market funds, but Americans were panicked. They were pulling the money out of money market funds. The money market funds could not roll over or extend those loans to the European banks. So the European banks went to their lender of last resort, which was the European Central Bank. But the problem is the European Central Bank can print euros, but it can't print dollars. So where were they going to get the dollars to bail out those banks? So what they did, the European Central Bank printed up, trillions of euros. The Fed printed up trillions of dollars. They swapped them. So the Fed got the euros, the ECB got the dollars, and the ECB had the dollars to bail out the European banks. The Fed and the FDIC together guaranteed every bank deposit in America, regardless of size. Insurance was, $250,000, but if you had $1 million in the bank because, you had a car dealership or some business and that was your working capital, that was guaranteed. They guaranteed every money market fund in America. So there were extraordinary measures taken at the time to truncate this process. But here's the point. In 1998, Wall Street bailed out a hedge fund. In 2008, the central banks bailed out Wall Street. In the next crisis, 2018, perhaps sooner, you're going to have to bail out the central banks. In other words, each bailout gets bigger than the one before. Each crisis gets worse than the one before, with the result that you need basically bigger and bigger balance sheets. Well, when the central banks are in trouble, which they are, they don't have the ability to bail out the world in the next financial crisis because their own balance sheets are stretched. They printed trillions of dollars. They've never normalized the balance sheet. Who's going to bail them out? Well, the answer is there's only one clean balance sheet left in the world. There's only one source of liquidity left where you can, reliquify the world. That's the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. They can print money. It has a funny name. It's called the Special Drawing Right, or SDR. And in the next crisis, you'll see trillions of SDRs being printed and handed out to reliquify the world. Whether that works or not remains to be seen. It will certainly be tried. Remains to be seen whether it'll work. But the cost of that is that from then on forward, the SDR will be the benchmark global reserve currency. The dollar will be over time reduced to no more than a local currency. So, if you went to Mexico, you'd get some Mexican pesos, or if you went to Turkey, you'd get some Turkish lira. Well, the dollar will be a local currency in the United States, but it will no longer be the benchmark global reserve currency. That'll be the SDR. And the result of this will be highly inflationary. It'll destroy real value in stocks, bonds, and other assets. And so what I tell investors is you need to prepare for that now by getting, whether some hard assets, whether it's gold, silver, fine art, income-producing land, maybe private equity, venture capital, things that will last, natural resources, perhaps water, et cetera, things that will last and are not subject to being inflated away by these SDRs.
When you talk to central bankers and top economists around the world, are they openly talking about the SDR, and do they believe or do they intend on that they've essentially got to just keep it going until the next crisis and then they can make the switch? Or is there a plan in place to potentially have a smooth transition rather than a big crisis globally?
Well, both things are true. The plan is a smooth transition, and it's a very long-term process. The SDR has been around since 1969, so there's nothing new about it. The IMF actually issued some SDRs in 2009, just shortly after, or maybe even during the late stages of the last financial crisis. So as part of the monetary toolkit, as part of how you deal with financial crisis, the SDR has been there for a long time and has been issued in the past. Now, the plan is proceeding in small steps. So in 2010, the IMF issued a paper calling for the rise of the SDR as the global reserve currency. As recently as July 2016, the IMF issued a working paper calling for the creation of what they call MSDRs. They created two kinds of SDRs in this paper. There's the OSDR, which stands for official SDR. That's the one that the IMF prints and hands out to members. Then there's the MSDR, which is the market SDR, and these are privately created SDRs. The IMF is trying to encourage the creation of a private market to improve liquidity in SDRs. And right on schedule, the World Bank came out and issued a $2 billion SDR bond issue. Now, notice I didn't say $2 billion or 2 billion euros. It was 2 billion SDRs. And then Standard Chartered, a big international bank, came out and issued about 100 million SDR bond issues. So these bond issues, by the way, were underwritten by Chinese banks and distributed mostly in China. Pardon me. So that's coming down the road. In addition, as of October 1st, 2016, the Chinese yuan, that's their currency, was included in the reference basket behind the SDR. And when I say, basket behind, it's not as if there's a big pile of hard currency locked in a vault somewhere backing up the SDR. That's not true. The SDR is not backed by anything. But there is a basket that's used to calculate the value of an SDR. If you said, well, okay, I've got some SDRs, how much are they worth in dollars, for example? There is a formula for that. And until the end of September, it had 4 currencies in the formula: the dollar, the euro, the Japanese yen, and pound sterling. And as of October 1st, they added a 5th currency, the Chinese yuan. Now, the Chinese yuan is not even close to being a reserve currency. It does not meet the IMF's own criteria for a reserve currency, but the IMF bent the rules for political reasons so they could include the Chinese yuan in this basket. And the reason for that is when the crisis comes and they have to issue the SDRs exactly the way I just described, they're going to need China's support for that. China is the world's second largest economy. They're about 15% of global GDP. They have about 10% of all the voting power in the IMF. So they're going to want China's approval. They're going to need China's approval to issue these SDRs. And China would say, well, why should we approve it if we're not part of it? If we're not in the SDR, well, kind of what's in it for us? And so the IMF said, okay, you're in the SDR. Now you're on the bus. You're part of this exclusive club. And we'll assume you'll be supported when it comes time to issue SDRs. So my point simply is that it's not going to come completely unexpectedly, at least to anyone who's been paying attention. They've been working up to this in steps year after year after year. Eventually they'll get there, but in this financial crisis, that they'll accelerate that whole timeline. The elites the Fed has never forecast a recession ever. The elites like to pretend that this financial panic won't come, that they've got 10 years to work out this SDR plan, and they'll take 10 years if they have the time. But my estimate is they won't have the time. We'll have a crisis long before then, and they'll be forced to accelerate the rise of the SDR, not because they necessarily want to, but because they'll have no choice.
Jim, which major country is best positioned for this post-crisis? And then I also want to ask you, when the SDR and all of this happens and the dollar becomes a local currency, will any of these central bank solutions do anything to reverse course of the erosion of the United States middle class? Because, obviously we're having this election here. This election is a lot to do, not so much with Trump and Clinton, but with everybody. It's just not working out. The economy is not working out for people. So with this SDR and all these changes, yes, these are central bank solutions, not free market forces, but will any of this help change things? Or is it just going to just be a big crisis and then another, decade down the road, we're going to have another big crisis?
Well, this might be the last big crisis, and I say that because this one will be so big and so damaging that I don't think the world will ever get back on track. You're going to see they're going to shut money market funds, close banks, close exchanges, launch a massive issuance of SDRs. It'll be highly inflationary. It'll destroy confidence in currencies around the world. And then if there's social unrest associated with that, what I call money riots, you'll see a martial law or even neo-fascist type of response. So it could get pretty ugly, and it won't be something that's easily reversed or where we just sort of power through it and wait for the next one. So this might be the last financial crisis because it'll be so large that it will actually change the world. Now, as for who is best prepared to weather it, probably Russia for three reasons. Number one, they have the least external debt. So Russia's debt to GDP ratio is quite low. They don't have that much external debt, and so they're less vulnerable to other countries, cashing out the debt, raising interest rates, crashing their bond markets, et cetera, as opposed to, say, the United States or China, for example, where they have very large amounts of foreign creditors. And in the case of the U.S., is a net debtor overall, with a lot of foreign creditors holding our debt. So Russia doesn't have that. Secondly, Russia has a very high gold to GDP ratio. Just that's the amount of gold they have in their reserves, at a market price divided by GDP, and that gives you a percentage. Their percentage is one of the highest in the world, higher than the United States, higher than China. So they don't have enough gold to back up their money supply, dollar for dollar at current exchange rates, but they do have a substantial amount of gold, and they could use that to restore confidence if they had to. And the third reason is kind of the resilience of the Russian people. When things get bad in Russia, they don't crack. They just say, pass the vodka. They kind of they're used to austerity. They're used to autarky. They're used to hunkering down. They've been invaded by everyone from Napoleon to Hitler, and so they do have a pretty good survival instinct. So for all those reasons, I think they're less vulnerable than China or the United States. But as far as you say, the global elite plan is concerned, they're going to try all this. It may work. If it works, it'll mainly be because no one really understands, or not no one, but very few people really understand it. But it may not work either. As I say, the income inequality, the fact that they start shutting down banks and ATMs and people can't get their money, it could lead to a lot of social unrest.
Jim, this year there was a movie called The Big Short. I'm sure you saw it. It was about the 2008 crisis. Gentleman Michael Berry made a big position and had to suffer for a little bit, but he ultimately was proven right, made a significant amount of money. For those people listening to this that are not that feel like they've done a lot to protect themselves and taken some of your recommendations in your books, but now let's fast forward to 2030, and Hollywood does a movie about the 2018 crisis. Not that we're putting a specific year on it, but thereabouts. Where are the big profits going to be made when this happens?
Well, it won't be so much about profits. It'll be a matter of preserving wealth. For example, I would expect gold to go to $10,000 an ounce. One of two ways. One way is that if they're going to issue these SDRs, because they have to do that. It's the only place to get money in the next liquidity crisis. You're not going to be able to get it from the central banks because they're going to be at the outer limit of what they can do. So here come the SDRs. Now, one of two things will happen. Either the SDR gambit will be successful, but it will be highly inflationary and gold will skyrocket in value because of the inflation, or it won't work because people see through it. They say, hey, we've lost confidence in all these other kinds of printed money. Why should we have any more confidence in SDRs? In which case, central banks and the International Monetary Fund may have to go to a gold standard, not because they want to, but because they have to. There's not a central bank in the world that wants a gold standard. Why would they? They have the competing product, which is money printing. They don't want to use gold as a form of money because they'd rather print their own. But you may have to go to a gold standard to restore confidence. Once you do that, it's critical to get the price right, because if you look at, let's just take the United States, Japan, China, and the Eurozone, the European Monetary Union. Just treat Europe as one country, if you will, for purposes of this. So Europe, Japan, China, and the United States together, their M1 money supply is about $24 trillion. Let's assume that you want to back that with gold at a 40% ratio. And that's a choice. I mean, it's debatable. I think Austrians would say it has to be 100% because they don't like fractional reserve banking. Historically, there have been gold standards that worked with as little as 20% gold backing, but I think 40% is high enough to restore confidence and not higher than it needs to be. Well, 40% of 24 trillion M1 money supply is $9.6 trillion. That means you need $9.6 trillion worth of gold to back up the money. Well, there are only 33,000 tons of official gold in the world. And so, some seventh grade math, 33,000 tons divided by $9.6 trillion, it comes out to a little over $8,000 per ounce. Bearing in mind it's a moving target. By the time this happens, it'll probably be $10,000 per ounce. But my point is, that's the implied non-deflationary price of gold. If you price the gold any lower than that, you're going to have to reduce the money supply to maintain the parity, and that will be deflationary and will cause another Great Depression. And so people say you can't have a gold standard because there's not enough gold. Well, that's nonsense. There's always enough gold. There's exactly as much gold as there is. It's just a question of price. You do have to get the price right, and with 33,000 tons, it's going to have to be, as I say, $9,000 or $10,000 per ounce in order to support global finance and commerce, to support the M1 money supply without having to reduce the money supply. And so gold is going to skyrocket one of two ways. Either the SDR works, in which case it's inflationary and gold will go up, or the SDR fails, in which case you'll have to go to a gold standard. And once you do that, you have to get the price right, and the price will go up. So this is why I expect $10,000 gold. But here's the point. A lot of people say, oh, woohoo, I bought my gold for, $1,300 an ounce, and it's $10,000 an ounce, and I made all this money. Well, in nominal terms, you did make the money, but in real terms, probably all you did was preserve wealth, because when I see gold go from, I'll just say, I'll use 2,000 as a round number, from 2,000 to 10,000, I don't think of gold going up. I think of gold as constant. I think of the dollar going down. In other words, it takes more dollars to buy a unit of gold. So gold going from $2,000 to $10,000 an ounce is really an 80% devaluation of the dollar. So if you have gold, it's not so much that you made a big windfall, but you preserved your wealth. And that's important because everyone else will be getting wiped out. People who have savings accounts, annuities, insurance, retirement income, or other assets denominated in dollars, the dollars are going to be, as I say, devalued by 80% or more, whereas if you have gold, you'll preserve your wealth.
What last question, Jim? What about the mining shares to more than preserve your wealth? I mean, for those who can stomach the volatility of the resource sector, do you recommend that mining shares be part of a portfolio?
Yes, but only on a selective basis. And you're right. I mean, gold mining stock is in effect a leveraged bet on gold. The economics of gold mining are such that they have certain fixed costs to mine gold at a certain price per ounce. But when the price goes higher than that, their fixed costs don't necessarily go up, and so all that money drops straight to the bottom line. So therefore, their stock valuations go up much more. The profits go up much more than the price of gold. So if gold goes up 20%, gold mining shares might go up 50 or 80 or 100% or more. So it's very attractive in that respect. If you think gold's going up, which I do, then you would definitely want to own gold mining stocks. But you have to be very, very selective. Gold mining stocks are not generic. Geography is the same, geology is the same, feasibility studies are the same, cost of capital may be the same. The techniques are the same, but what's different is management. Some of these companies are very well run. They're attractive investments. Some of them are crooks. Some of them are frauds. So you can't just throw money at gold mining stocks without, at a minimum, doing your own due diligence. But I would say even better, get some advice or recommendations from a fund manager, or I actually have a newsletter called Rickards Gold Speculator. I write with a colleague named Byron King, who is a Harvard-trained geologist and lawyer, and he looks for these kinds of things. So the point is, gold mining stocks are fine. They're a leverage bet on gold. That cuts both ways, of course. You can make a lot more money, but if gold goes down, you lose more money. But we're looking at a scenario where gold is going up. But you do have to be very selective, and I wouldn't invest in gold mining stocks unless I was getting very good advice from somewhere, or else I was perhaps invested in a fund managed by somebody like John Hathaway, or someone who really knew what he was doing.
Jim Rickards, author of The Road to Ruin. Everybody, please go out and buy this book. I'm going to have a link for everybody. You can contact Mr. Rickards via Twitter. I've never known anybody so accessible, that's so smart. And then Jim, you also mentioned a newsletter with Byron King. You said it was Rickards Speculator?
Rickards Gold Speculator, but my flagship newsletter is called Strategic Intelligence. That's a monthly newsletter. We pack a lot of information into that. These are all from Agora Publishing, so people who are interested can go to the Agora Financial website and learn more about it. And if you're interested in the book, it's available for pre-order on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and independent booksellers. My website is jamesrickardsproject.com, and so you can get a lot more information there as well.
We'll have all these links for everybody. If there's only one book you're going to buy this book this year as soon as you have access to it, which you can pre-order. But I also strongly recommend everybody, go into the next 4 or 5 years, especially post this election, you need to be ready. And I think the best way you can be ready is, first off, start off with the book Currency Wars, then The Death of Money, The New Case for Gold, and The Road to Ruin. These 4 books right here, I don't really think you need to read anything else. Jim, again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.